Everybody, welcome to this week's PDP titled How Diversity Delivers with Jamie Gorey from Johnson & Johnson. Jamie began her career at a Texaco distributor in sales and marketing, but she received her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration at the University of Central Florida, where she now lives with her family in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. However, she has spent the last 20 years at Johnson & Johnson in multiple positions across the pharmaceutical and medical device sectors. Her career began in 1999 with the acquisition of Alza by J&J, which then led to her role as a district manager with McNeil Specialty in Orlando. Then her move across sector roles in MD&D finally ended with her becoming the Director of Strategic Accounts within the J&J Med Device Strategic Consumer Group. Currently, she is an area director for the Southern Coast area for Ethicon. In this role, Jamie supports enhanced sales execution, analytics, operations, and strategy. In addition, she leads the regional sales specialists and directly manages their selling team responsible for the Links business. And we are so honored to have her here today to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Jamie, thank you for joining us today.
Amanda, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I'm so excited to talk to you today. So without further ado, I'll get started. So today, I'm going to talk about really diversity, equity, and inclusion. But more importantly, talk about really what you can do, give you kind of an education on the why from a business perspective, and then how Johnson & Johnson approaches it, and hopefully some very pragmatic things that you can do as you guys get ready to enter into the sales force. So I always like to start with the end in mind. So this is a quote from Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. There's been so much talk, certainly in our organization and out in the community about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does that mean? So I want to start with the end and why we do it, why Johnson & Johnson is so committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you start with the end in mind, our end goal is to develop and lead high-performing teams. What we do know is diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's the right thing. So, but besides the right thing to do, it also enhances business performance. It really helps to develop more innovative teams. It better serves our community, and it fosters innovation. And because of that, it really is one of the leading indicators in a high-performing team. So, we think about diversity and inclusion and what does that really mean? And what is that, what is the kind of the practicality of all that? So this is, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. Essentially, diversity without inclusion in a workforce, in a community, probably in your school, it doesn't work. And so what we really do here is, take a look at inclusion and what does that mean? And it's the process of really valuing the individual's diverse talents and perspectives and creating a culture that makes them feel included. And when we think about diversity, we think a lot of times about diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, gender. But really, when we look at diversity, it is so expansive. It's spiritual beliefs, it's physical attributes, it's income, sexuality. And so what I would encourage you guys to do is to really think about diversity in a much broader sense. And when you're looking at diversity, one of the most dangerous things in a company, and really maybe period, is groupthink. Is not having a diverse perspective. And that is why we really spend a lot of time making certain that not only we are attracting diverse talent, but we are making people feel included in an environment where they feel like they can be heard. So, we're talking about, kind of an approach of the way we approach DE&I as a business imperative. And now I'm really talking once again about the why. And this is a study by McKinsey. And what they found is organizations with more diverse and inclusive cultures drive innovation. They're 8 times more likely to have better business outcomes, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, 3 times more likely to be high performing, and 2 times more likely to meet financial targets. So that is really a lot of the why on, once again, why we're so committed and why it's important to building a healthy, sustainable organization. And our customers, when we think about our customers in the healthcare landscape, our customer landscape has really evolved. And once again, that's really like our society, if we think about what the latest census has said. And as our landscape continues to evolve, we really have to keep pace with this evolution in terms of our workforce and our teams. And in able to do that, it has really taken a commitment to making certain that our teams and our organization represents the communities that we serve. So at J&J, we talk a lot about, race to health equity. So I wanted to just pause a minute and just share with you, like, what does that mean? And then what are the actions that we're doing? And why that might be important to you as you guys are looking, as everyone out there is, looking to enter into the workforce. What we do know when we look at health outcomes in our society, that the underserved communities have, there's not equity in their outcomes. They have, on all leading indicators, their outcomes and measured by health outcomes and mortality is significantly under the general population. So at Johnson & Johnson, what we wanted to do is, being the largest healthcare organization in the world, is see where can we affect change and how can we use our organization to really make an improvement in those communities. And that really speaks to, passion and the values of an organization. And as you guys, and as everyone here is looking to go out and look at the companies you want to work for, the values of an organization is very important. So what were the 3 pillars that we decided that we were going to land on in order to make our commitment to race of health equity? One is, it's really a culture of our people first, is really investing in our commitment to a diverse workforce and really cultivating a culture of innovation. And the other was healthier communities, is working to close the racial mortality gap. And we're really doing that by investing in those communities and really innovative models to help fill those gaps of where we see the poorest outcomes. And then the other is enduring alliances, is working within the healthcare industry and our community partners to align and to partner on better outcomes. So this is relevant, I think, to everybody here. This is the title of the slide is Sparking Global Employee Engagement, and I'll touch very briefly on what Johnson & Johnson does, but there's really, I think, lessons in it for everyone, and especially a college student looking to engage and really figure out how they can start to participate in a diversity and inclusion mindset. So at Johnson & Johnson, we really talk a lot about being an ally. And so what being an ally means is you may not be technically a member of an affinity group. So what that would mean, let's say for me, we have OLA, which is a Hispanic group. I am not Hispanic, but I am a member of that group so that I can really grow and learn. And in that, I've become an ally. So one thing that I would encourage everybody to do is really kind of practice, or whether you participate or formally join some groups on campus or just listen in, all in an attempt to really learn and expand your mind and the thoughts that you may have had about any particular affinity group. So we really focus on allies and making certain that we have a broad representation and really broad exposure to many different groups across J&J. The other is med tech. As you guys are well aware, technology is evolving and evolving fast. So we make certain that we engage our employees and then the community using technology. And then our commercial leaders. So our leaders at every level are fully not only engaged, but committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you look at organizations that you may be interested in working for, I think understanding their leadership engagement is really key to knowing, is that a fit for you? Is that organization a fit for you? And then, lastly is, we talked about improving health equity. Johnson & Johnson is really committed to making a difference. And we're making a difference really by reaching across our platforms in medical device and pharmaceuticals and finding out where we can help, what are the gaps, and how can we leverage along with community and industry partners to make a difference in these underserved communities. And we're doing that by enhancing patient education, by also making certain that we have a much larger presence and innovative solutions in these underrepresented communities. So I've spoken at a high level and briefly what Johnson & Johnson is doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But from an employee, from an N of one, one of the things that I decided to do years and years and years ago is really, I alluded to it before, was I joined multiple groups and really learned and listened and learned to broaden my perspective. So at the time, I started out with OLA. As I mentioned, it was a Hispanic group. I lived in South Florida. It was a great opportunity for me to learn. I'm a mentor for our women's leadership. I also participate in Open and Out, which is an LGBTQ we call them ERG resource group. But my point being is I really decided just to participate with the goal of learning. And it's really been probably one of the key differentiators that has helped me in my career, quite frankly, is to understand people's perspectives and really learn the power of listening. So that's, what I've done. And I currently, we call them employee resource groups. So that the group that I mentioned, like OLA, that falls under a broader header called employee resource groups. I actually am the field lead for Ethicon right now. So I was asked to step forward, but I stepped forward and leading a bunch of several other leaders in that. And that's really been such a great experience and a way to get involved. So I would just close out before, any questions that might want to be asked is the best thing that you can do is really get involved, listen, and learn. Do you have any questions, Amanda?
Jamie, thank you so much. I do have some questions. That was a great example of how to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the workforce, but also here now as students and what we can be doing to actively work towards that and become allies. I love that word that you use. So my first question to you is, what are some things that you mentioned that you anticipate will change dramatically regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion within the business world in the next 5 to 10 years? You mentioned DEI as a leading indicator in really high performing teams. And as we start to see that necessity in the business world, what do you see changing the most?
I think what I see changing the most is, quite frankly, a rapid adoption across multiple industries. I'd like to think of J&J as on a leading edge, but we still have, several industries that have not adapted as rapidly a mindset of DE&I. So if I would say, what are the things that would change the most dramatically? I think that would be one of them. I think that you're going to see the importance of focus along multiple industries across the country. And then I think companies partnering, industry, maybe and sometimes competitors, really partnering to address, whether it's injustice, but like how what we're doing with equity, with health equity.
Yeah. So just more of an expansion of interest company-wide and an expansion of focus and how we're starting to include more of those things like ERGs that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it'll be a strategic pillar for most organizations.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. So then from our perspectives as students, when we are looking at companies for internships and full-time opportunities, what questions can students ask to better understand how companies are including that focus and expanding their scope of inclusion to promote diversity? Because you mentioned J&J's landscape has evolved drastically over the years. So how can students be aware of that moving forward in interview processes?
Great question. I think first is, I'll go back to the fundamentals, always look at the website and see, because I think any organization that is really focused on it will have that in their website somewhere. So I would say first, I would get a really good environmental scan using what's out there, be it on social media or on their website. And then I think then asking the question, a great question to ask would be, do they have employee resource groups? That is something that is not unique to Johnson & Johnson. That is an industry term, quite frankly. And so I think that that's something good to ask is, do they have employee resource groups? And then where do they put diversity, equity, inclusion in their priorities? And I think, whether you ask all of them or just one of them, it'll give you a really good idea of where they stand.
Okay. No, that's a great idea. And I also wanted to ask that so that students didn't feel that they couldn't ask about those questions in interviews or when they're sitting down with somebody at the company, because those are things as time goes on that need to be at the forefront of our mind when we're trying to discern where we want to end up.
Yeah, and I also think it's not a bad idea to be prepared for an interview question related to it. So, I think it goes both ways. You may find that you're asking your potential employer the question, and you may find that the employer or potential employer is asking you the question on trying to get an idea of your lens and how open or how you look at diversity, equity, inclusion. So I think it could go both ways.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. So for students, that's a really good action step moving forward about how to have something prepared during that process. So then moving on into one day when we are business professionals, we're in the field. I love that you said diversity. I don't want to butcher this, but diversity is the invitation to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance, or something very similar to that. How can we as business professionals be proactive about that when we are not in a decision-making role, specifically in a leadership position? So thinking entry-level roles, you're new to the company, what does that look like?
Technically a people leader in a leadership position, the way that you could do that in a very pragmatic way is twofold. One, I will say, is get involved. So if they do have employee resource groups, get involved. And the other is when you're in a work group, listen and be respectful. It might seem so basic, but listen and be really respectful of diverse opinions and ideas, and make certain that you pause to give everybody a chance to express whatever their idea is. And I know that seems simple and pragmatic. You'd be surprised. Sometimes people forget that. And if you start practicing that early and often, you will be prepared to take a more enhanced leadership role later on.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Some of the most functional, even school groups or teams I've been on here, are when everybody has a place at the table. And I think it was Joanna Gaines that said that, but everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody gets to have an opinion and a say. And it's because we come from such diverse backgrounds. And that's such a valuable thing, which I think is why, you mentioned earlier, this is such a key indicator of high performing teams, because you create that space where it's collaborative and it's open and everybody can, kind of say what's on their mind or bring ideas to the table. So I think that's a really valuable thing for students to remember, as well as we are still in college, however much time we have left, we have projects down the road and things we have to work on with other people. And so it's good to be proactive in that way and be thinking about ways to include others in the smallest of ways, like you said.
And it will parlay into being able to also answer a interview question about that, about getting other people's perspectives if you start practicing it now in any of your work groups. And I think that there's always a learning. It does at every level. There's always a learning when you're working in groups.
100%. I would agree. Can speak from experience.
Yes. Yeah, me too.
My last question for you, Jamie, is I love that you mentioned how we can become allies here on campus, and that becomes being involved, and then one day being involved in ERGs in an organization. But what are some resources that you found to be helpful in educating yourself on diversity and inclusion, maybe besides the ERGs, or besides, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. Well, one thing that I've done, I've listened to podcasts. So
Okay.
what I would tell you is, it's a really great way. I think I would say have intellectual curiosity. So, and the way to do that is, I've read a few books. I've read Unconscious Bias. So, that's a book that I could tell you I've read, but I will say, especially college students, and maybe all of us, but when you have so many competing priorities, getting the information in small snippets that you can kind of control. So I would suggest just going on and researching podcasts. There's some TED Talks also. So if you just go ahead and put in diversity, equity, inclusion, you can get a variety of perspectives. I suggest it so that you can start to formulate your own, kind of your own mindset and how you're going to approach it.
That's a great idea. That's something actually a lot of professors and people here in the business school promote as well, because it's the best way to learn when you're on the go. And I think that's another really good action step students can take to start learning and incorporating that into their daily life. So yes, that's helpful. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise on how diversity really does deliver in the workplace and how we could be working on that now. So we are so appreciative. Thank you so much for everything you've talked about today.
Thank you, Amanda. Have a great day, and it was my pleasure.
Thank you so much again, students, for tuning in with us today with Jamie Gorey to talk about how diversity delivers in the workplace. Do not forget to go click on the link and fill out the survey for today's PDP. Thanks so much and have a great day.